Kevin, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tom. Sure. I am a professor of philosophy of religion at Asbury Theological Seminary that's located in Kentucky. I've been teaching there since 2006. My interests have been in philosophy of religion, yeah, but last 10, 12 years, more moral philosophy has been kind of what has grabbed me. And so a lot of my research has been done kind of in the intersection of moral philosophy and moral psychology and how that relates to theology some too. But that's my academic kind of interests in a very quick nutshell.
Cool. I'm an atheist, so I'm also very interested in the moral question. I believe the topic we had selected for today was faith in God and what that means. What is your position on faith in God?
Well, you mean, do I have faith, or do you want me to try to define it for you, or is my understanding of it?
Yes, both, either the same.
So I do consider myself a person of faith. I sometimes kind of cringe at saying that because I fear that it's going to be immediately heard certain ways. So I'd be happy to give an account or talk a little bit about what I understand faith to be exactly. But maybe I usually begin by saying a few things about what I don't mean. So that word faith is usually used to try to capture a number of very distinct concepts or ideas. So sometimes it's used just to talk about the Christian religion. So the Christian faith and the articles of faith, these 20 things kind of outline what it is to affirm Christianity as opposed to any other religion or worldview. So that's the faith. So that's the first sense. A second sense is sometimes Christians talk about an attitude of hope for the future. It's meant to be a hope rooted in what we believe happened on Easter weekend, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But it's a forward-looking kind of hope for the future. So Hebrews 11 in the Christian Bible talks about the great people of faith who looked forward and allowed that future reality to impact their current experiences, and it filled them with courage, and they were able to withstand persecution and all the rest. So that's the second sense of faith. Sometimes it's just kind of an attitude of hopefulness toward the future. And then thirdly, related to that, Christians do identify it as one spiritual gift. Some people within the body, the church, seem to have an extraordinary ability to see light at the end of the tunnel, even when things get really dark, and they're able to encourage other people. So those three senses of faith, I outline them to say that that's not what I'm talking about. Now, these get mixed together all the time, but that's not really what I mean when I say faith. What I've been interested in is the question, and this was my dissertation on largely this question. What is it that a person decides to do when one puts one's faith in God? Say, if I'm a Christian, I put my faith, Tom, I tell you, in Jesus Christ. What does it mean? Like, what do I decide to do when I put my faith in? And Christians have usually seen this as a dividing line, if you will, between those who have a certain kind of positive relationship with God and those who don't. Well, it's those who have put their faith in God. So I've been interested in that question. What is it to put one's faith in God? So I would say that, yes, I've put my faith in God, and we can unpack as long as you want what I think that means and what I think I'm doing when I'm putting my faith in God.
Yeah. So do you think that faith is something unique to religious individuals, or is it a more general term? I mean, the atheist definition is usually faith is a belief that goes beyond the evidence of some kind.
Yeah, so for me, that's just I absolutely reject that definition of what I'm doing. So what so your original question was, can a non-believer have faith in certain things? Well, yes, you can have allegiances, you can have commitments. I would certainly see faith. I think those are a lot better synonyms for what I think I'm doing when I put my faith in God. Allegiance, commitment, something like that, rather than mere belief. So my whole dissertation largely was, I'm glad you zeroed in on this, because my whole dissertation was trying to resolve what was a dissonance in my mind. And the dissonance was that, just to make it long story short, faith and belief seem to be equated. I was told that we could put our faith in God. We were encouraged to put our faith in God, but I became more and more convinced of philosophical arguments that belief, and we'd have to make some qualifications to this, but belief is involuntary. Like, we find ourselves believing things. It's not the kind of mental state. And again, I'm just going broadly here. We could talk about details and potential exceptions, but it's not the kind of mental state you hold by choosing to hold it. You find yourself believing things. So I was kind of exercised with the question, if belief is involuntary, and if we're all encouraged to put our faith in God, and goodness, if God is going to judge us on whether we put our faith in him, and belief is involuntary, and a belief is a part of faith, if not to be equated with faith, then that seemed to be a huge amount of dissonance in my mind. And I wanted to kind of like come up with my own account of what I thought. Not that I'm inventing the wheel, but I wanted a better account of faith than, mere belief. I just think that's a terrible thing to equate those two for various reasons. I think that, but.
So what is the difference between faith and belief?
Well, so it's harder for me to talk about the commitment of faith in a general term without getting into specifically Christian doctrine of what I think happens when we put our faith in Jesus Christ. So I don't know how much of the theological stuff you want to bring in, Tom. I mean, but generically, I'm much more comfortable with the idea of allegiance, commitment to, we say in Christianity, to a kingdom that we believe Jesus initiated on the events of Easter weekend. He inaugurated this kingdom. And we could talk about what a kingdom is and how I understand that, but it's aligning ourselves, pledging allegiance, if you want to use that phrase, committing ourselves to this way of life, to this kingdom. Kingdoms operate according to certain principles or certain way of life, if you will. So in that sense, that would be a generic, we can make our allegiances, our commitments to certain ways of life. Yeah. In that sense of exercising faith, I would say this is a broad, Christians and non-Christians could exercise it. But that would be how I would understand faith, more of a commitment and allegiance to certain principles, to a certain way of life, to certain goals or purposes.
So a lot of the atheist community, specifically Aaron Ra is a big proponent against faith. He says it's the most dishonest position ever, or something along those lines. There's a certain version of the definition of faith that entails these things of, well, I don't need evidence, or even if it goes against the evidence, I can just believe it, or I can believe it despite what else anybody else says, or things along those lines. It seems like an integral part of establishing a definition for a word is how it's used in the common culture. And we could obviously just make up new definitions for any word we want, but is your definition reflective of how it's used in the common culture, or do you have a much more selective usage?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm not married to the word at all. What I'm interested in is the concept that I think, I'm interested in an account of the decision that I believe God is trying to make, or trying to elicit from all people. The kind of decision that God is inviting people to make, trying to get people to make. In Christianity, in English, we picked out that word usually to just pick one of them with the word faith. I'm not married to that word. There's a kind of a recent book by Matthew Bates, theologian and philosopher, who takes the moniker Salvation by Faith Alone. And the book is titled Salvation by Allegiance Alone. And what he's trying to get us away from one of the things is equating faith with belief and saying, look, this has always been something that Christianity has taught, that it's more of an allegiance. It's more of a commitment to we believe as a tri-personal God, but to building a kingdom. Yeah, if you want to make the point, and I think it's absolutely a fair point, in popular belief, or popular culture, I should say, colloquial language, we equate faith and belief. And that quote you had presupposes it's irrational because it presupposes the kind of equating faith with belief. Yeah, I concede that it's usually used like that in common culture. And I for various reasons, I think it's a terrible definition, but for theological reasons, I think that. I don't get to, you're quite right. I don't get to decide that. Like language doesn't happen because I decide it's a publicly, like, I totally agree with that. So I don't blame other people. My kind of focus has been blaming Christians for going along with this, for giving the impression, if not outright saying to people that it's a matter of what you believe. And for various reasons, I have a problem with that. One, it sets people up for failure. Because if the message, like if I'm a Christian and my message to you, Tom, is try harder to believe it. Well, I've done it to a terrible disservice, I think. I mean, any earnestness you might have for exploration would be quickly vanquished when you get home and try your hardest. And well, I guess it's just not for me because I can't choose to believe. So I have a problem with Christians who equate the two. And I don't mean to be mean about it. I just want to encourage Christians to maybe use better language. But I don't blame people in the popular culture for equating faith with belief. Yeah, it's usually equated in everyday conversations. Yeah.
So it sounds like your definition is essentially like a conviction towards an ideology. Is that an accurate portrayal?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say a little bit more active than conviction, because I could be convicted and just be a lazy person or a weak-willed person and never follow through on anything. But allegiance is a good word. Conviction, though, allegiance, faithfulness. I like faithfulness better than faith. Faithfulness to a cause or a set of principles, theologically, I would use the language of the kingdom that I believe Jesus has inaugurated. Yeah,
that makes sense. So I definitely would agree with. I think your definition is more rational than the typical way it's used in the common culture. Because given the typical way, I can understand why atheists have a revulsion to it, because it seems like a scapegoat kind of a definition. You mentioned that we don't.
And can I just interrupt you really quickly, Tom, just to say one more thing? Plus, it's an easy answer to those who are in and those who are out, like the good folks and the bad folks. Well, just check what they believe. Yep. Anyway, and I mean, for various reasons, I bristle at that.
Yeah, I think there's a huge issue in the common culture of the in-group, out-group bias. Of if you don't believe or say X in the right way, you're evil, you're bad. I've recently had several debates on, is saying trans women are not women always transphobic? And even just bringing up the question, you get labeled as a transphobe. Doesn't matter what your argument or your position is. You just take the bad position, you're evil. You did bring up the question, do we choose our beliefs versus, and you were contrasting that to faith as if there's a difference. We don't, or we can choose to have faith in a different way than we choose to have beliefs.
Well, I believe that the act of faith is the kind of decision that both that we are capable of making, whereas the act of choosing to believe is not, except in very imaginative scenarios, something that's, one, psychologically difficult, if not impossible, and two, I think there's actually logical problems, except in very kind of outlandish thought experiments. There's logical problems with the idea of choosing to believe something. So yeah, I reject that, but I think I want to reserve a role for the will and for voluntarism in the act of faith. But now we got to do the work of distinguishing the act of faith and belief. So I think there's an account that I would offer of explicit faith in Jesus, but the Christian tradition is, for a long time, 2,000 years, also talked about the possibility of implicit faith. Are some people responding to God without actually forming beliefs about Jesus? So could you implicitly be making a decision for God, or actually responding in some way to Jesus without recognizing it? So those are the kinds of issues that I wanted to explore. Kind of, you got to pick a subject for 4 years of your dissertation. I thought, well, I could, that could keep me exercised for 4 years.
I probably would have picked like video games or something, but
well, you can go that route too. Whatever keeps your interest is the key thing for 4 years.
Yep,
that's what's important.
So, from a naturalist perspective, beliefs and actions, neither one of those are chosen. They're not like, there's no like.
Well, no. Why would actions not be chosen?
Well, to us, it's deterministic. It's very determined. You make actions based off of the chemicals acting in your brain, and so any beliefs you have, it's like saying, if I give you a significant amount of evidence that the world is round, you believe the world is round because of the evidence. Your brain is determined that if you're presented with a whatever the evidence is, it will cause the correct things to fire in your brain for you to accept the belief the world is round. And the same thing for action. If you're given the correct inputs, it will cause the action in the same way that the correct inputs will cause the beliefs. And so it seems like there isn't a substantive difference from the secular perspective between us not choosing our beliefs and us not choosing our actions. So what is the difference from your perspective?
So I'm not a determinist, but I do note that, so I wouldn't take the line I'm now going to offer to you, but I think most determinists, as you know, would still want to affirm free will. It's just that they wouldn't affirm libertarian type free will. They would affirm compatibilism, or some, and that's a broad term, but some version of that. That's obviously compatible. Genuine freedom being compatible with determinism. So there's your move right there. But what I would say is, even if I'm a compatibilist, and I'm not, but even if I were, I would still say there's a problem with choosing to believe that's not there with choosing to act. Like there's a cycle, there's a logical issue here. But anyway, so
the first point, from a compatibilist perspective, beliefs and actions are still the same, whether you call them,
well, they're determined, but a compatibilist isn't going to say, he's going to say the question of whether my action is determined is irrelevant to whether it's free.
Right. So the question here is like, what's the difference? Because you said that beliefs you don't choose, whereas actions you do choose. From a compatibilist perspective, the amount of free will you have is equivalent in both beliefs and choices.
Well, no, I don't. Well, I don't think so. So this is a debate that I consider moot. Well, yeah. I don't engage with this debate that I'm now doing with you, just because I don't buy these assumptions. But let's just say, for the sake of just discussion, that I bought the assumption that I'm a compatibilist, that I can have robust, genuine freedom in this deterministic world. Just quickly, one of the logical problems with direct belief acquisition is this: that if beliefs are meant to be our maps of the world, right? They're representational in nature. They take, like, they're meant to be our mental states that reflect. Meaning, philosophers talk about like a mind to world fit, like they should fit with the world. My mind should fit with the world. That's what a nature of a mental state that's a belief is.
Map in the territory.
Map
in the territory.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So if I know that I have a new belief, and you ask me, why do you believe that? And I say, well, I chose to believe it, Tom. If I recognize that my new belief is a result of my sovereign choice and doesn't necessarily reflect the way the world is, then it's not a belief by definition. Be like a cartographer, a map maker, just drawing a map of the United States and saying, well, I'm going to put Kentucky down on the coast because we never get the ocean. So I'll put Kentucky over here, and I'm going to make Rhode Island a big one out west to give those guys a break. If I know that my map is a result of my sovereign choice, then it's not a map. So there seems to be a very deep logical problem with the idea of choosing to believe and being aware that I've chosen it. Same can't be said for choosing actions. So I understand choice of an action between actions would be desired goals. I'm Humean about motivation. I choose this desired goal versus that desired goal. I can do that in full consciousness, recognize what I did. There's no logical problem, but there was with the belief.
Well, so like the first thing that initially comes to mind is I like to think of myself as the smartest person in the world. Now, I have lots of evidence to the contrary, but I choose to believe this. This is perfectly fine.
Well, I don't know. See, I don't know that you choose to believe that.
But you said this doesn't apply to actions, because it seems like I can do the same thing with actions. I can say, I'm going to believe I'm going to win the lottery, so I'm going to buy a lottery ticket. This is a particular act, the act of trying to believe. I've said that is a special case, but I was thinking of desired goals. I think that's what the choice between actions is, this desired goal versus that desired goal. I don't think we choose this believed outcome or that believed outcome. That's just not available to us, I would say. Well, so like I would say the actions are inspired by the belief. So if I believe I'm going to win the lottery, even though it's a terrible belief.
Yeah, inspired by the inspired. I think there's maybe better language, Tom. So let me see if I give you this language, if you'd be happy with this. Again, from Hume, and I'm a kind of a big Hume. I know you probably don't have a lot of theists say they're fans of Hume, but I mean,
the famous naturalist.
I mean, I don't think he was right about everything, but in my opinion, he's the most formidable philosopher ever to write in the English language. But I just don't say that too.
Wait, didn't he write in German?
Hume?
Yeah.
Well, no. Um, well, here's what a good Humean would say, that desires always do the motivating, right? They incline me, that's what the world, the mind fit. Like when I find that my desires conflict with the world, I don't give them up like beliefs. I am motivated to change the world to make it fit with my desire. So I want there to be coffee next to me. There's not coffee. I change the world, or at least I'm impelled. I have some move to want to change the world. So desires motivate, beliefs guide our action. That is, beliefs explain why I do this action in an attempt to achieve my desire, rather than that action in an attempt to achieve the desire. So my desire to get to Cincinnati is what motivates me. And I get on I-75 North instead of I-64 West because I believe that I-75 goes north. But the belief doesn't motivate me. I could believe that, I can believe whatever. So I would say beliefs guide our actions. Desires motivate our actions.
Yeah, that's fair. I was combining the two, and desires as a kind of belief. But the question is, like, again, from my perspective, I'm not understanding the difference that you're outlining between beliefs being not chosen versus actions being chosen. Because if I say if something's going to compel me to believe a fact, some fact about the world or whatever, it's simply determined by me being given information. Like, somebody tells me the moon is 255,000 miles away. They say, here's how you can demonstrate it by bouncing radio signals off it and just time it. I'm given that information. My brain will then automatically believe the moon is 255,000 miles away. And the same thing seems to be done for action. So if I have a desire, whatever the desire may be, and I have some beliefs about what will achieve that desire, if you give me enough information that it's highly likely to be successful, then it seems my action is going to be equally as much determined as my belief.
Why would that be so? Why would that be so?
Well, if you told me I was going to win $1 billion by pressing the red button, I'm pretty much automatically going to press the red button. It's like,
well, so right. Well, there's a few points here. One, we could certainly act with a very weak belief, couldn't we? I mean, like the classic one about the Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, where he, tries to step across the chasm. Are you familiar with this movie? It's always thrown up in those clips. Yeah. So it's not the father is saying, you got to get yourself to believe, or he says something like, you must believe, boy, or something like that. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of his goal is so important to him that even if he thinks there's a 10% chance of surviving, he's still going to do it. I mean, this happens all the time. I've done this before. I could give you examples. There was one time, Tom, I was a groomsman in a wedding. This is like 25 years ago. And it was like half an hour before the wedding. And they realized they didn't have the book. People were starting to arrive, where you write your names. And so the apartment is five minutes nearby. And he says, Kevin, go and get them and get back for the wedding. And I go, driving like 90 miles per hour, just on the loop of the city, and get to the apartment, and my car dies and it won't stop. And it's just like this terror. And it's in the middle of summer. I'm in a tuxedo with a pink bow tie. It's just a nightmare. It's like one of these tension dreams, but it actually happened to me. So I start flagging. I mean, I didn't have anything to do. I start flagging down cars. And the first, 3 just gotta, don't roll down the window, honey. They think I'm a crazy guy. So I thought probably the next car has maybe a 20% chance of stopping. But it was still, the important point was, I believed that was my best chance of achieving my desired goal. So I would say the same thing, just to take it back a little bit to faith, that it seems to me that the level of belief I need to be a Christian is simply that by aligning myself with Jesus, that has the best chance to achieve the goals that I have, as opposed to any other action. So how strong does that belief need to be? Well, it could be, it could be less than 50% in principle. The crucial point is, I believe that's the best way to achieve my goals. And what are those goals? Well, people have faith for a number of reasons. They want direction in life. They want, some people have, are racked with guilt. They want forgiveness. Some people want to meet their creator. It could be any number of compatible ultimate goals for aligning myself with Jesus. My point was simply that this could be compatible with weak belief. Now I know we're I'm taking it a little bit direction. Your original question was about the freedom bit. It sounded to me though that you're like a libertarian who doesn't think we're free in a deterministic world. I actually would sort of agree with that, but it's not I'm not defending compatibilist freedom or anything like that, because you said belief and action were in the same boat because they were determined.
Yeah.
So I just kind of curious, would your view be that determinism precludes genuine freedom?
Well, if by genuine freedom you mean libertarian freedom, yeah, I think libertarian.
No, well, no, whatever you think genuine freedom is, like the kind
Uh,
that's needed to ground more responsibility, let's say.
well, I don't think freedom is required for that. So I would have I have a different, unique perspective on morality. But I grant the compatibilist view just because it's fine. I think it's fine,
Okay.
but I think it's just determinism. It's the same thing as determinism. It's just classing things differently in determinism. But from my perspective, like I grant that there's a like game theory relationship between desire and belief, and that if the reward is high enough, you're willing to take a risk that you probably wouldn't take for a lower reward at a lower chance of it being successful or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'd say the same thing happens to belief. So, for example, we see people who are flat earthers. They believe the world is flat, even though all the evidence goes against them because it achieves their goals.
Well, no, all of your evidence would, maybe all of my evidence, but I take it that, well, a few things. One, willful blindness may be a part of this. I mean, this is a hugely important topic. I think self-deception and the way we can come to get ourselves to believe things by trying to just turn our attention away from and avoid uncomfortable truths. So I'm like big on the phenomena of self-deception and kind of coming to believe things. The mother in the court who believes the son is innocent of drug charges. My baby, that there's no way that my little baby just a few years ago was such a little innocent child. There's no way that he could be a drug dealer. And they really believe it because it's just too uncomfortable. So I would say a flat earther might have their evidence, like that's their reading of, let's say, the Old Testament or so, the creation story in Genesis. That's their reading of it. And they think what God has revealed is most certainly true. And I would agree with that too. And they think God has revealed that because, I don't know, their pastor told them, or because, I don't know, whatever. So I would say that they probably think they think there is good evidence. It may not be like evidence coming from certain quarters, but it'd be the evidence of authority or someone who knows enough to know, even if we don't understand it. God knows enough to know, even if it seems to befuddle the best human minds. Anyway, that's probably how I would explain their belief, other than simply choosing to believe it.
Yeah. So for sure, but I'd say that that bias exists in us, which causes us to prioritize certain evidence over other evidence.
Oh,
and
I'm
that
with you, bro.
Same bias exists when it's to prioritize certain actions over other actions. And so if we're trying to say that there's a substantive difference between choosing a belief versus choosing an action, I'm not sure what that difference is.
Right. Yeah, we'd have to kind of spell out a lot of, I think, some details here. To prioritize a certain belief, I mean, that's kind of I take it what you mean by that is there's a certain belief that's comfortable to me, and I have a hard time admitting other evidence contrary to that, and I don't want to look at it. And so I'm inclined, and Francis Bacon famously, whatever a person desires to be true, that he more readily believes. I mean, it's like, and this borne out in all kinds of everyday situations. I'm totally with you on that. But is that a matter of prioritizing a belief and choosing to do something? Yeah, well, there's a certain belief that is attractive to me that I'd like to hold. And you can put it in terms of, I don't want to admit these other evidence, or I continually turn my attention away from the other evidence, but I get to the point where I genuinely believe it. Here, just a quick example. You ever watch like a sports game with fans of each team in the room, like the different teams, and each one is screaming, saying that the bulk of the referees' missed calls are going against their own team?
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And they believe it, right? Like they believe it. So I'm with you on the bias bit. But when you talk about prioritizing actions, it's just that, see, I think this is the nature of choice. At any one time, I've got a range of desired goals. And free will is choosing between desired goals. Now, I know you might come back and say, but I think it's all determined. And okay, I mean, this is a different problem than the logical problem of believing and realizing I've chosen to believe it. It's a different kind of problem, but I would, my personal opinion is determinism would undermine genuine freedom. Most naturalists don't believe that, but they tend to be compatibilists, as you've noted. But anyway.
Yeah, well, we've gone on. I've got 7 minutes left because I don't have Pro of Zoom. So when it ends, I'll just send you another link.
Okay.
Email it to you.
Okay.
So tell me about more your view on morality, because you said that's what you've been focusing on for quite a while now.
Well, oh gosh, that's a pretty open-ended question, Tom. I don't even know where to begin.
Drowning babies, good or bad?
I'm sorry, did you say drowning babies?
Yeah, drowning babies, is that good or bad? Morally good or bad?
I would say it's bad. It's bad for the babies, and certainly bad, period. I don't know where to begin. I am a welfarist. There are many people who think that beyond what's good and bad for people, there's just intrinsic goodness, like irreducible goodness as a property. I'm a reductionist about that. I don't believe that. In my personal opinion, I don't think that property, the property of goodness simpliciter, features in our best explanation of the world. But that's a kind of I tend to be metaphysically like in normative properties, very much a reductionist about these things.
Yeah, from a naturalist perspective, I would definitely agree there. But that seems like it would be in conflict with God's nature is inherently goodness kind of a thing.
Well, inherent goodness. Yeah, I hate to be a cop out. I'm still not sure exactly what that means, because I ask different people and you get different answers. I would say God is the source of life, and he's certainly good for people.
Well,
I would say, yeah, but in addition to being good for people, good for creatures, bringing them abundant life and whatever, participating in God is to have life and all. But aside from that, he's just good as an irreducible property. I don't know what that property consists in exactly.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think like the way I like to phrase it is I ask, like, is something good because we ought to do it, or ought we do it because it's good, to try and outline that whatever morality or whatever goodness is, there has to be some set of properties that like make it up, identify what goodness is. And just saying that there is goodness in and of itself isn't really a meaningful statement.
Yeah, this is taking us a little bit away, but here's the way I like to think about this, Tom, is that there's two kinds of thought experiments, and I think you just got to say to yourself, which one is more intuitively compelling? So the first is that if someone destroyed a beautiful Rembrandt painting or something, it was beautiful, it would be bad for people. People wouldn't get to enjoy it, future generations. But beyond that, it would be just plain bad. Something inherently beautiful, objectively beautiful, would be destroyed. And some people just find that intuitively compelling. The other thought experiment is, and so Robert Adams and others puts forward thought experiments like that. Who is the guy? Wayne Sumner puts forward this one, though. If you were to tell me that this world A, is better than world B, but you couldn't tell me any sentient creature who can experience a well-being. So like Thomas Nagel's What's It Like to Be a Bat, someone that can experience their life as going well for them or poorly for them. You can't name me any person, any creature, any being in world B whose life as they live it, as they experience it, is any worse than in world A. I'm at a loss to see why I should prefer world A to world B. Now that experiment I find more intuitively compelling than the first one. So I tend to be very much a welfarist. Something is only good if it's good for someone.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think those are really good examples. How would you measure what is good for someone? What do you think is the criterion to establish one world is objectively better than another one?
This is where I want to put objectivity and morality. I think there are truths to how humans flourish. I think we have cues and clues of it all around. For me, the Christian description of perfected relationships is largely what compels me to be a Christian. The way that we enter into these perfected relationships, that they have to be based on truth, a shared narrative together about exactly what we've done to each other, for each other, good or bad. They're only entered into through self-giving love. When you have this mutually self-giving love, it's the only way that a range of potential defeaters to a perfected relationship, resentment, jealousy, all these other things, And Christianity, for me, Jesus and his teachings paints a picture of those perfected relationships that I find more compelling than any other kind of picture of human perfected nature that I've ever read. And so that compels me, if I were to say just in one sentence, that compels me to be a Christian. The vision that I think Jesus gave us of how his kingdom is built, the kinds of perfected relationships. But I do think there's a truth to how we flourish. I mean, we all have individual differences. Maybe you do it through poetry, that brings, and maybe I kind of,
I do not do poetry. I'm not.
Well, then pick a different example. But
dare you
know what I mean?
My honor.
There's a lot of individual, ways that I might flourish, but I think there's some important commonalities having to do with love, self-giving, this kind of thing. And so I would say something is objectively good if it is in fact good for someone. And I can be mistaken about what's good for me. Clearly, I mean, the old adage, be careful what you wish for. We can certainly be, but that's an epistemic matter, of course. And then the question is, how do we find out about this good life, the good life, and what is possible? Is it possible that there could be a God and a heaven and all that kind of thing? Or maybe we have to settle for something a lot less. But I think that would be, for me, the important question. How do people flourish? Or sentient creatures? Now, I don't want to just confine it to humans. I mean, any person who has a well-being, who can experience their life going well or not well for them. That's what I think is fundamental to morality.
Yeah, I would definitely agree there. And I would say that given any definition we'd come up with whatever flourishing and well-being are, it seems in conflict with a lot of the things in the Bible if we take it literally, like world flood, global flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, turning people to salt, those kind of things. And it seems
on the surface, I would agree with you. I think a deeper dive, I'm not. If I were convinced of that, I certainly wouldn't be a Christian.
Right, that's why I'm not.
Because of the Old Testament stuff.
Well, because of, it seems, if there was a perfectly good being who could maximize well-being, maximize happiness or whatever,
right,
it seems like there are clearly logically possible worlds to achieve any possible greater good without having murder, rape, child cancer, etc. We just pick any bad we want and we can get rid of that. And it seems like there's always going to be a logically possible world where you can have all of the positive benefits of well-being without child cancer. And if that's the case, then it seems necessarily that either whatever the reason is, it has to be beyond human comprehension. So just beyond a logically possible world, which just seems ridiculous. Or God must not be all powerful, ability to do anything logically possible.
Yeah, well,
we have 1 minute left, so it's going to end randomly at some point.
Well, okay, there's a long answer to what you've said that I would want to give in a very short answer. I'll give you the very, very short answer, and that is you've already carved up space. It seems to me in what you've just said to recognize there is no best possible, because you'd always add one more good thing to.
Derp. Well. Please return after this commercial break. Lols. Zoom is dumb. 40 minutes limit on a conversation is very dumb. Oh, you just want to try on here? Oh, I can, yeah, post here. There you go. Added the link in the private chat. You see it? Can Kevin, is my audio? Yeah, it is. Participants admit. There we go. There you go. Got it.
Yeah, I had to get on. Oh, okay, I had to get the pro because it was so annoying. I know it's so annoying.
Yep.
The 40-minute things. Yeah. I just bite the bullet on that one.
Yep. All right. So we were talking about morality, and you said that there is no best possible world. Now that I disagree with. That I definitely disagree with.
Really?
Yes.
Well, if you think you've identified, like the best one, it wouldn't. I mean, you said I thought you had just said that, like, logically possible. I thought you just said it would always be logically possible to, to do one better. I mean, to add one more flourishing creature to it, or one more good
No.
encounter,
So
something like
my
that, to
argument
make it better.
was that there's always going to be a logically possible world to have any possible greater good, free will, maximal flourishing, whatever, without some kind of negative consequence. So, like, typically Christians will argue that, well, God has some greater good, some reason to allow child cancer or whatever.
Mhm.
And if there is a logically possible world to have whatever that greater good is without the child cancer, well, then okay, it must not be a
Mhm.
reason.
Mhm.
And so my argument isn't that adding one extra flourishing unit is possible. My argument is that the negative consequences are not required.
Well,
That is
it's
the
right. So I can't talk. The problem of evil is just way too big for us to, like. We do a 13-week course as one of the courses I teach, and I just can't pretend to do it justice. And not that it would convince you or anything, but just to give a robust account of what I think is helpful for me. At least I couldn't even summarize it in 10 minutes. But just as a brief question, I suppose I'd ask, how good does it need to be consistent with God's goodness?
no
For people like my
involuntary.
life right now, I'm glad I live it. It's not perfect, but I'm really glad to have lived it. But I recognize some people, might have a retching disease and die at the age of 2 after 2 years of pain. And maybe you think, well, that's clearly not worth it. How good does, like, everyone's life need to be, or at least possibly be, with their good decisions, to be consistent with God's goodness?
Yeah, I would say there would only need to fit one principle, and that would be all wills that exist. There would be no involuntary imposition of will. And meets that criteria, and then you have.
No involuntary imposition of will.
Yep.
I don't. Sorry, I don't think I follow.
So, like, um, if I wanted to punch you in the face and you didn't consent, it would be physically impossible for me to punch you in the face. So if I'm trying to infringe on your will of not wanting to be punched in the face,
Right.
it would, if you don't consent to that, I can't do it.
Right. So I think, I mean, so here's a beginning of my kind of thoughts on that, Tom, would be, and this isn't going to cover natural evil as much. That's going to be something different, more complicated a bit. But I think, in terms of why I think free will, and I'm a libertarian type free will, is so important, I think there's something to perfected relationships among personal agents. There's a certain kind of dynamic where we both, as partial ultimate causes, like where the buck stops here, like not a deterministic chain, but that you, Tom, as a irreducible agent, are partially the cause of your own actions. So you got influences, you got DNA, all that stuff, influences, yeah, but you contributed something to this pie that we're building together. And so for me, the vision of perfected relationships includes looking at each other for eternity and kind of, what did you contribute to this pie? What did I contribute? There's a certain dynamic when creative agents contribute something. It's bigger than just me and bigger than you. It's something we did together. So I think we need the power to be ultimate partial causes of our actions, which is libertarian freedom, to each contribute as a bona fide personal agent to the perfected relationships that, in my belief, we can possibly enjoy for eternity. So that for me is why freedom is so important. But of course, what you've just said is that I wouldn't have freedom, because I would understand. Well, if I get stopped every time I can't choose how I relate to you.
Correct. So this doesn't mean that you are physically stopped. One possibility would mean, like, I am become like a ghost, non-physical being. So you can do the punchy action as much as you'd like. It's just not going to hit me. So there.
Well, no, I can't meaningfully choose how I'm going to relate to you.
Well, I don't know what that means. So, like,
well, I relate to you positively or negatively. I mean, it seems to me to be a candidate for these kind of interpersonal perfected relationships. I got to be a personal agent making self-determinative decisions. Well, about what? About what soda to drink? No, about how I'm going to relate to you, to God, and to other people.
Wait, so I'm
That just
lost on the disconnect here. So like I can be mean to you. I can say mean words to you, like on a like over a computer, for example.
well, that might
All of
bother me more than punching, but go ahead.
no, that's fine. That part's okay. So as long as I can't infringe on yourself or your property, I can do whatever I want with myself and my property. That's fine. So, but if, for example, we could in this world, we have the option of making a world exactly like Earth we have today. And the only difference is that the only people who can enter this world have to do it voluntarily. They have to consent to being here. So all of the possible interactions we have in this exact world are possible in the world I'm describing. The only difference is people have to consent to be here. And
To be
so
here.
it seems like
So you give so the idea is you give people a snapshot of what like counterfactual knowledge of what the world would be like if they were in it, and allow them to make a decision whether to be in it.
yeah, give them like a trailer. You could like a trailer of this is what Earth is like with
it, well, is
cancer.
that the idea?
Sort of, yeah. So it's like
Okay.
people have access to the knowledge to know what the world is like, and they can consent to like have a disclaimer, one of the like 5 million page things that the cell phone companies give you when you accept a phone, like check mark if you agree and you'd like to be here, or go to a different company. And so the same thing would apply to possible worlds in this case, where you can say, I would like to be a part of the one as God designed it, exactly how God designed it. Or be like, I'm going to go with the one without the child cancer and the murder. Those, yeah, I can deal without those. I'm good without those. And so in this possible world, all such interactions that can happen in this world can happen in that world. But the second thing is that it's you bring up this argument that there needs to be some kind of an interactivity between people for it to be a meaningful relationship.
Well, of a certain kind, yeah. I mean, I can have a meaningful
Well,
relationship with my cat, but it's of a different kind.
we'll say,
But
could you
yeah,
have a meaningful relationship with Stephen Hawking, paraplegic? He literally
sure.
is incapable of punching you in the face, no matter what he does. Can't do it. He's
Sure.
physically incapable, but that doesn't mean you can't have a meaningful relationship with him. And so the same thing would essentially apply in this world, that we are all equally as capable as a paraplegic to punch someone else in the face who doesn't consent to it. But
But
that
this
doesn't seem to infringe on the ability to have meaningful relationships in any way.
this seems a little. I mean, my to my ears, it seems a bit oddly arbitrary about what's harm. I mean, I think a lot of people, their deepest harms don't come from being punched. Their deepest harms come from being rejected, come from being not like told,
Oh, right. And I agree with you. We can keep all of those things as possible. But I'm saying, you asked what is the minimum requirement for a world to meet the standard of what a perfect being would create. The minimum requirement would be no involuntary imposition of will. And then if you voluntarily choose to be in a emotional relationship with someone else and they reject you, that is their prerogative. They have that will and you have your will, and you don't have rights over their will. And so if they reject you and you feel pain from that, that is okay. It is not, this world doesn't eliminate all pain and suffering. It's only the involuntary will interaction kind. So if you want to just turn off pain and suffering in your brain, okay, fine, go for it. But you can keep it on and you can enter into agreements and you can experience all of the suffering that this world has to offer if you choose to. But so it offers the capability to have all of the kinds of genuine relationships if you choose to.
right.
And so it doesn't seem like
So
it causes that problem of limiting
yeah.
relationships.
So right. So I can't really my intuition, and it's not just an intuition, but my initial thought, which I don't think have time for this. It's thoughtful, like what you're saying. I like the scenario. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I would wrestle. Like, why didn't Hume does this too? I mean, I've already admitted being a fan of Hume. Why couldn't God have done this? This would be better without, there's not any greater good necessarily connected to it. I'm not sure that you could have all the goods that we think we might have in such a world, but that would take a while to spell out. Second, I just kind of an interesting question. If I could just take it back to the issue of faith a little bit, just because I'm trying to just see how this might connect to there. If it were clear, I mean, it seems to me in such a world, it would be abundantly clear that God exists and would, say coordinate virtue and happiness or something like that. Do you think there's scope for kind of religious ambiguity being a needed part of our world in order for us to have scope for moral freedom? If you were a libertarian, let's say, whether or not to, I mean, I'm just thinking if God's existence and providential care was overwhelmingly obvious, the only way we would have scope for moral choice is if we were just really inherently malevolent kind of creatures. Whereas we could be less malevolent, but the choice would be made possible through the religious ambiguity, kind of the epistemic distance, as John Hick put it. It's just not clear to me that there is a God who's going to make things work out for those who try to follow him, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think there's any scope for that in the nature of faith, in the nature of having to make self-determinative decisions about what we're going to commit to? Just a thought. I mean, for some people, they found that pretty compelling, that there has to be some religious ambiguity in the world for there to be scope for moral freedom.
You can have that in my best of all possible worlds. Like, God doesn't need to reveal himself to anybody to give them any of these things. Like, you can just have an iPad that pops up in front of you, like, where did this iPad come from? I have no idea, but it gives you the options for the world you want to pick or whatever. And so even if that was required, that would still be possible in the best of all possible worlds. Right. That's the label I give it, which is why I disagreed when you said there was no best of all possible worlds. So if that is a greater good, then yes, we could have that too. And so as my original argument stated, it says whatever the greater good may be, it seems like there's always going to be a logically possible world to have that without whatever the negative consequences you are. And I would go so far as to say that we can have a world with no involuntary imposition of will and all of the possible greater goods. And so if maybe next time we can go over what you think would make it so that the goods that you can't have in this world, because I've never heard a compelling case that I can't get a logically possible world with all of the greater goods anyone could ever imagine.
Right. What about there's a completely different kind of approach, and it's a more maybe it's a more theological approach, if you want to call it that. But what the Christian tradition affirms, and I don't know, I used to not find this as compelling. People would say this, and I didn't really find it compelling, and I more do now at my stage in life. And I'm not trying to say like when you become wise like I am, and I'm not trying to say that at all. I'm just giving you my personal. This didn't really appeal to me that much when I was younger, but it does now. The idea that in Jesus, what Christians affirm is we don't have someone that came and explained like all these questions, which are legitimate questions, I think, but rather the strategy seems to be coming and joining us in the suffering and walking through us every step of the way. And arguably, maybe that's what we need more than the intellectual answers. Maybe intellectual answers in the end don't actually help nearly as much as we think they're going to help. And they might actually work against the kind of relational building that really enhances our long-term, or allows us to participate in longer-term relationships of communing with one another, empathy for one another, helping one another. I mean, part of it is, because we don't know, we have to help each other in the journey. So this kind of mutual dependence, perfecting of relationships. That's just a general thought. I can't flesh that out in kind of a.
Well, I would actually agree a lot with that. So suppose there was a God and the God had the option of giving us a pamphlet that had all the answers in it or whatever, versus actually just coming down and solving all of the problems. Like, yes, solve the problems, just solve hunger. Don't give me a pamphlet. I don't care about the intellectual answers.
Yeah,
just
but solving hunger. It with our participation. I mean, if he wants to build this kingdom with us as part of it, so that we are like not equal creators, but co-creators of this kingdom that he's building, then it's going to be a lot more work, and it's going to be a lot slower, and it's going to involve God having a lot more humility and patience than just like the dictator who comes in and makes the trains run on time by crushing everyone who dissents.
So I would definitely agree that intellectual answers are not as important as pragmatic applications. And so actually putting in the work to make a difference is more important than giving people intellectual answers. But I think that the putting in the work method of Jesus' sacrifice was a bad method. It seems quite arbitrary, irrelevant, doesn't accomplish anything. There seems to be infinitely many ways to do it better. And the best of all possible worlds thing I described would be like what I think would be close to the pinnacle of what it should have looked like, rather than sending yourself to sacrifice to yourself on a cross.
Well, you're right. So I wouldn't put it that way at all. So if you have the image of like there's the crass father who demands retributive justice, and the father has to, look, we got to satisfy pops because, he's gonna like crush you all. So I guess I'll do it. I'll be the scapegoat in that way. That's not my understanding of the atonement at all. I don't blame anyone for thinking that, because so my battle is usually with fellow Christians to say, look, let's not get entrenched in one particular denominational understanding, say, of the atonement. Ignore what the bulk of the Christian tradition has wanted to say, and make extremely dogmatic pronouncements that paint a picture of God that, frankly, I wouldn't want to believe in.
Oh, right. There's a hilarious meme where it says Jesus was a Jewish zombie who was sacrificed to himself because a rib woman ate from a magical tree from a talking snake or something along those lines. But so I agree. I think the doctrinal thing isn't really important here. But if we take the minimal facts of what is entailed in the Jesus story, that an aspect of God came down and walked the life similar to humans and experienced suffering as humans did for like 3 days or something or however long the torturing of the crucifixion took.
But of course, it was the whole life of being, before that being, this. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, one sec. Yes, sorry about that. My computer did a little update thingy. It's like, go away.
It happens.
Freaking Microsoft updates. But yeah. So Jesus being an aspect of God coming down to a world to experience a life like humans. Mm-hmm. To me, this seems like Seth Andrews had a very hilarious quote for this. He said, since Jesus essentially just had a really bad weekend, he had a normal life for the most part, lived a human life, and then had a really bad weekend, and then took a few days off and went to heaven, or went to the intermediate locations outside of the realm of the planet. I mean, there's obviously lots of worse ways to die and worse ways to suffer. And so having the God experience the same kind of suffering we did seems to not really accomplish much other than, I don't know, giving God some kind of knowledge of what it's like to be a human. And it seems like the better solution would have been to just solve the problem in the first place. For example,
what do you think the problem is?
Well, I think the problem is the involuntary imposition of will. So I think that is the core emulation of what I think the problem is that there are involuntary impositions of will. And
you mean the good life is what? I don't understand what the good life is then. Just getting your will?
Well, no, because that's the involuntary imposition of will is what like the minimum standard is, and the good life is what you do with that afterwards.
See, I don't have, well, one, I think that is in my opinion, that is a enlightenment kind of inspired, and I'm not talking about yours. I'm talking about like the goal of like autonomy. That I have a very different intuition about, and I think it's not just an intuition, but it's kind of more empirically about, since the Enlightenment, we have lionized autonomy, like to think that that's what the good life consists in. I don't see it that way at all. So I think we might have very different conceptions of kind of the conditions for the good life. I don't disagree about autonomy being a necessary element in our deepening relationships, but like just making my own decisions, I'd much rather emphasize how we were born into narratives, and I think the good life is getting caught up in the right narrative.
Well, I don't think I wasn't disagreeing there. So I was saying that.
Okay, I may have misunderstood like the implications of what you're saying. So I apologize.
The involuntary imposition of will is the minimum requirement. It's like the starting position, and the good life is what comes after that. It's what you experience and how you live life and grow from that starting point. So without that, you have a bad life. And then once you have that, then it begins to become a good life, and you get to experience and grow and have the more diverse experiences of what a good life actually is. But I wouldn't just say just that is
Okay.
the
Okay.
end all be all.
Okay. Would you, I mean, in my kind of picture of the perfected relationships, it becomes psychologically impossible for us to harm each other. So, I come to you and I nudge you if we're in a community of perfected relationships and I say, let's leave out Jill and watch her squirm. You would say, there's nothing, it's like trying to tempt a healthy mother to harm a newborn. It's just psychologically impossible. So I think there's a sense of freedom that comes when we are just so our theological language in Christian circles, we call it fully sanctified, but our desires are completely aligned with God's, so that we don't have this kind of libertarian type freedom, at least on moral issues anymore. We might creatively figure out how to serve each other in all kinds of ways, but for me, that's kind of a goal to be working toward, the total conformity, where I no longer have to kind of like, should I be selfish or should I, where it's just automatic. And so for me, that's kind of part of my vision of the good life. But you raised a good question though about why couldn't God have come down in a better way? So I think it's a good question. I think this gets to the heart of what I think faith is. Faith is aligning ourselves with a kingdom. What I think was established on Easter weekend and why it needed to be this way. Yeah, there is the issue of so we can have an advocate who understands the way we've suffered and that he knows what it is to be accused and all that kind of stuff. And I agree with that. But I think fundamentally what happens is God takes on the full effects of our misdeeds, frankly. And this is why I think the cross is so important, because it's only in the cross that I think we fully see the full implications of like the small stuff we do, like lack of moral courage, jealousy, slander, that kind of thing. That is what led a group of people to think it a good thing to crucify what we believe the one like person who had never had any misdeeds. That's the effect of my jealousy when I'm, jealous of people, or I lack moral courage. It's that. So for me, one of the huge reasons the cross is important is because we see fully the truth about who we are and what we've done to others and God, and what God is willing to do for us. So perfected relationships they got to be built on a truth, like the full truth of who we are and what we've done to one another. So that's one reason I see the cross is really important. Another is that I think in the cross, Jesus did take on the full effects of all those misdeeds and established a kingdom, a set of principles that now death and no other worldly power can come against. And I think what we see then is that true kingdom power is not coercive power, it's loving creativity. So the kingdom works that I think Jesus establishes by peace, by humility, by self-giving, sacrificially if needed, these kinds of things. I don't know that it could happen any other way than that. So that for me is the fixing of things. It's establishing a kingdom, a different way of doing things, where success gets measured differently, power operates differently, all the rest. How joy, we live into joy, works differently than like material possessions and the way the world understands it and all that. So I think that's what was happening on Easter weekend, and that was God fixing things. And I'm not sure, could it have happened a slightly different way? Maybe, but I don't know what it would have. I can't imagine what it would have looked like, if not something similar to that. So taking on the full weight of what we've done and still building a kingdom through that, and showing that in the resurrection, for me as a Christian, that the truest power, the highest power, is actually creative loving.
So there was a super chat before I wanted to bring up before we, there's a few questions. One of them was, by your definition of well-being, how many people or how bad would the suffering have to be for you to stop having belief in a God? How many billions of people would have to be suffering before it was like uh, sufficient enough to discredit the belief that God was all powerful, all being?
So where I got to say this isn't plausible anymore, folks. Things have gotten so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't think my commitment to Jesus hinges on what percentage. Like, it's not that I think the world is pretty good, and this is pretty good empirical evidence that things are improving. I think there's a vision of the good life that is compelling to me. And going back to the how firmly do I have to believe it? even if there was lots of, well, no, I don't want to put it that way. I think what I'd say is I probably would find a way to justify that in terms of the nature of human sin, the nature of what we do. I don't know that I'd go around saying, yeah, this is exactly what we should expect. But nevertheless, I don't think I would count it as really conclusive evidence, because I don't think it's the kind of evidence that for me determines my commitment, my allegiance. It's not based on empirically what I see. I think there are theological reasons to think the world is getting better, and I think there are theological reasons to think the world's not getting better. And I don't know, like, if you ask me, is the world going to be better in 100 years from now? I hope. I don't think I have a firm belief about that. I mean, I see a lot of great things going on, like there's floods in Kentucky where I live right now, and people are at
That's one of the great things that there's great things, and there's floods in Kentucky.
No, what I mean, yeah, what the great thing is that people are outside all the supermarkets, collecting all this water and doing all this stuff. And it's like, I wish we could do this more when things weren't quite so bad, but it's great to see the camaraderie and people come together about this. That's great. And that gives me optimism. But then I turn on the news. Well, I don't really watch the news anymore. And then I just get incredibly depressed, bro. I mean, I just like the world. I think the way that God is building his kingdom is in a different way than simply that can be observed as simply like empirically looking at the world, how much suffering there is. Like, I'm not saying that's irrelevant at all. I think God cares deeply about it, and I do too. But my understanding of the way that Jesus is building his kingdom and why I think he is building his kingdom, why I'm a Christian, doesn't really hinge on the empirical numbers of people suffering. I'm not saying it's not important. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that's not why I have allegiance to Jesus.
Gotcha. Geoff asks, why was it necessary for Jesus to take on the misdeeds of humans?
The misdeeds of it. Yeah. So this is a very, I don't want to say misunderstood, because I don't want to sound like I've got the answers, and y'all need to stop listening to some terrible presentations of the gospel. But there's a little part of me that wants to emphasize that just because you hear one articulation of the doctrine of the incarnation and atonement, just please know that the Christian tradition is very broad, and there's a lot of rich resources, and there's really, in my personal opinion, a lot of really poor resources. So did Jesus take on our sins? If you mean it like the scapegoating, like he became, I know there's hymns like he became sin. If you mean like he somehow, and this, like, I don't know the metaphysics of this, but he literally became guilty because of our sins, I'm going to say, I don't understand what that means. Now, I know colloquially, you may have heard Christians say like he became sin and all this. I'm not comfortable with that metaphysics at all. I don't think you see that in the bulk of the tradition at all historically. Here's what I would say. He took on the full weight of the effects of our sin. This is where lack of courage, this is where control issues, this is where resentment and jealousy lead us, and giving authority to worldly powers is included in that. Powers to coerce, and this just the bad stuff of human beings. I mean, just to put it bluntly, I think he takes on the full weight of that, and still is able to establish a kingdom. So I think the crucifixion, it's not that Jesus died for our sins and he was rewarded with like the glory of being Lord of this kingdom. I think that is the inauguration. That is him becoming Lord. Self-sacrificial, self-giving love as the highest power. I mean, C.S. Lewis talks a little bit about this in the Chronicles of Narnia, about how they kill Aslan and they don't understand how he's risen from the dead. And his response is something like, well, the White Witch knew about this magic, but there's a deeper magic. That's just a kid's way, I think, of putting it. The real power is the power of creative love. We see that in creation, and the world's power is coercive power, as we know. And so there's a triumph over creative love, self-giving, over coercive power. So took on our sin, yeah, the effects of our sin. Did he become guilty? Like literally become guilty because of our sin? I'm gonna say I don't know what that means. I can't imagine what that would mean, even though I confess that we Christians have often given that impression that that's what was happening. And I don't know what to tell you other than I'm sorry.
Gotcha. All right. Next question from Dale Wilson. If it were demonstrated to you beyond all doubt that Christianity was false, would you choose to continue believing anyways? Would you try to convince others to believe in it?
Well, no. If I were convinced it was that it was not true, I think what I had to be convinced of is that there's another way to bring about that would better, or more likely bring about my purposes of. I think I have got the same broad purposes as probably you do, Tom, about wanting the world, wanting people to flourish. Sounds like you're a welfarist, like I am,
Sure.
wanting people to flourish. And animals too. I don't mean to just, be just a human thing.
Animals are people too.
If I became convinced that there was a better way, then I would, I suppose, abandon Christianity. I can't see that happening, but I don't typically go around and encourage people to believe. What I would want to do is encourage people to take steps that, in my view, they're responding to the Holy Spirit. So this is a Trinitarian thing where my understanding of the Trinity is that the work of the Holy Spirit is always to prompt us whenever we have an idea of do something good, do something helpful. It's always the Holy Spirit, in my view, prompting us. And the Holy Spirit prompts us to do one thing only, and that's join Jesus in the kingdom that he's building already. So when I feel led to pray for someone, because Jesus is already praying, led to help someone, Jesus is already at work in their lives trying to help them. It's kind of the initiator, the mediator. I'm interested in having people turn to Jesus. And if they don't have explicit beliefs, then I would encourage them to do things that I think are kind of implicit decisions for him. Like they wouldn't recognize it as responding to the Holy Spirit, but I think that's what's happening. I'm much more optimistic about a person that I think is responding well to their moral intuitions, which I think is the voice of the Spirit, than I am to someone who says all the right things, believes all the right things. But you look at their life and it's like, you're a total scoundrel, or you're just like unbelievably selfish. I think the first person is closer to the kingdom, in my view.
Gotcha.
But yeah, if I became convinced there was a better way and Christianity was demonstrably false, I don't know what would demonstrably falsify it for me. But yeah, if I became convinced, then I would have to say, well, our goals of trying to help people flourish can't be accomplished this way. Let's try to see what's next in line. Sure.
Makes sense. That's a great answer, actually. I really appreciate that. Bjorn asks, can you imagine love without Jesus?
Yes, I can. But goodness, it sure helps. And it sure gives me a much deeper model and understanding of the kinds of things that can be loving than I would have otherwise had. And it makes me aware of the ways that, my sometimes good actions are, frankly, because they're comfortable to me. I mean, it's easy to help someone who's, just as easy example, it's easy to help someone who's really nice. The challenge is helping someone who's really annoying or who slandered you or something like that. And so in Jesus, you got this person who's reaching out, continually giving to people who have their backs to him. And that for me isn't a huge challenge. It expands my understanding of love. It makes me realize that when I think I'm being loving, maybe I'm just kind of like, I'm doing it because it's not that uncomfortable to me. So can I imagine it without Jesus? Yes, but it's rather impoverished understanding of love without my understanding of the model of Jesus.
Gotcha. Question from Vlad the Stoner from Twitch. Appreciate the Twitch follows as always. What are your beliefs on how old the Earth is?
14 billion years or so. I mean, I think the creation story is, I don't think they're trying to answer the question, how old is the Earth? I don't think they're trying to answer I know they're not trying to answer the question of whether God did it or whether it's naturalistic. It's just not the questions they're trying to answer. I mean, we talk about what were they trying to answer? You got to think about the worldviews of the ancient Near East. And that's where you begin to have an answer to what they were trying to communicate in the creation stories.
I think it's more like 4.5 billion. I think 13 is the universe. 14 is the universe.
Oh, sorry. Was it? Oh, sorry.
Earth.
Did he say the Earth?
Yep.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes. Then yes, your answer. Sorry about that.
Question from Rage of the Machine. isn't having so many different doctrines a strike against Christianity being a message from God?
Yeah, it's a good thought. That's a really good thought. Not necessarily in my view. I mean, I certainly see the kind of the pull of that. Like I think that there's something to be said for that. I think there's although also something to be said for the incredible ability of people to run with the narrative and for various less than perfectly motivated reasons, run with certain angles of it because they like to control, because there's a certain picture of God, say, as a vengeful thing that kind of, aligns with what I like. I like to see people get theirs, buddy. And, I like a God who does that, who's going to, to kind of, defeat my enemies through coercion like that. So when you look at the various ways that humans can fall short, from that perspective, it's maybe no wonder. Plus our limited epistemic capacities. There is this kind of thing where I think a lot of theological divisions are because, like, I have an authentic experience, let's say, Tom, or at least it seems authentic to me. I hear your testimony. It's different than mine. Now, I know mine was authentic, so I'm a little suspicious of yours. There's a lot of that dynamic, I think, in history and going on today. And so from that perspective, it's a less than perfected, motivations. And maybe it's not that surprising, but I'm not trying to poo-poo the original comment. Yeah, from a certain perspective, you'd think, but then again, I look at humans around me and myself. I'm not trying to exclude myself, and I think, well,
Gotcha. All right. Question from Charles and Solo. Thank you for the super chat. Was Jesus the God of the Old Testament, or was that a different God? And why do Christians try to separate the two?
Yeah, well, really quickly. So we Christians believe that the full revelation came in Jesus, and we know about it largely through written texts. Contrast that with the Islamic vision of the full revelation being a divine, a text received from above, and we know about it largely through a person, Muhammad, who wrote it down. So the full revelation, just to be quick, came in Jesus. In my affirmation, in my belief, everything in the Old Testament is a progressive revelation. I mean, how do you reveal yourself to people who think the gods want the oldest child always killed sacrificially, who think morality in marriage is a matter of confining your prostitution activity to the temple, like that was a thing in the ancient Near East. So how do you reveal the perfected self-giving love of Jesus to humanity? You got to do it progressively. And I don't have time to talk about progressive revelation and all the themes in it. But what I'd quickly say is the full revelation is Jesus. That is the lens through which you have to understand every Old Testament passage. If I don't understand how this particular old passage is God trying to get people prepared so that they can understand the self-giving love, peaceable message of Jesus, then what that means is I don't understand that particular passage of the Old Testament. Now, I know you say, well, how do you possibly be reconciled? So I wrote a little book on divine wrath, like these outpourings of wrath. That's one of many topics you'd have to wrestle with in the Old Testament. It's way beyond the purview of us here, but that's what I would say. The full revelation is Jesus. Christians always affirm that's the lens through which you've got to read everything else.
Gotcha. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour and 20 minutes ish. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Would you like to give people any locations or books or where they can find out more about your work?
Well, the dissertation, what is, should know it. Let's see. The Decision of Faith, Can Christian Beliefs Be Freely Chosen? That's like a book, but I wrote an article there's a collection of just think about the stuff we talked about today, Tom. It's somewhere on my shelf. I just can't see it. I think it's called The New Theists, like the New Atheists, something like The New Theists. I have an article, but what about the fate of the good person? Like, the good persons. And I talk about implicit faith. Like, what about non-believers? What kind of faith, if any, could they have? And I actually think they can have a a kind of faith.
Gotcha.
That falls short of explicit, but they can establish some kind of positive relationship with God. So that article, the fate
Zoom is about to crash on us again. So
okay.
Thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it. And hope you have a wonderful, Oh well, it ended right at the end. It's close enough.